As far as the slideshow, I was going to mention that it's really boring to me to have these slideshows, and I'm just not programmed to like say beep and like say the next thing. I'm not like a PowerPoint type person. So what I'm looking to do is spend about 30-45 minutes going over my presentation and then really opening it up to you to pick my brain or offer critique or whatever floats your boat in terms of getting this conversation going. What the presentation is about is very similar to what the keynote was about. Wes is working with plants. What we're trying to do up at DAcres is create an agricultural system, a social system to perpetuate. So perennializing our social system and our agricultural system in its entirety, not just the plants. That's sort of the introduction. To get there in our conversation, what I want to do is tell you a little bit about myself, to give you the background, sort of the motivation that led me to this path. First off, I was born in 1971, middle of the year. 1971 has a lot of cultural significance in terms of people's awareness of the Earth. You know, it was this time where we first had the photos from space, and there was just a whole lot of awakening happening, yeah? Obviously, indigenous cultures and people around the planet had loved the Earth for a long time, but in terms of like Western civ, like we were on the fast track to sort of dominion and control, and these pictures from space really made us take a step back. And so within that, in my education process, I was heavily influenced by people who had just received that awareness. So if you were like 13 or 15 or 18 in 1971, you were my teacher when I'm in grade school, when I'm in elementary school. So I really see a connection there. I was profoundly affected by my grade school education, where we were really encouraged to get out with nature. We were really encouraged to come to that high level of awareness about the natural system. So from my earliest memories, I have that basis. I have that fundamental. And then some experiences of mine when I was growing up, I will relay. Welcome, welcome. I grew up in eastern North Carolina. It was an area that was under tremendous pressure of growth. The growth rate was like 7 to 10% in North Carolina in the 70s and 80s. And what was happening is there was an abundance of very fertile agricultural land that made ideal geography for subdivisions and strip malls and just the expansion of the asphalt jungle that we create. So that 7 to 10% growth in the 80s meant, when I arrived, we were sort of the pioneers of a subdivision. And I think we were the third house in the subdivision. That when we ended up leaving, there was like 38 houses, yeah? And so the areas, the fields that I was used to running around in and, just digging in the dirt and building forts in the woods and stuff became houses. Like slowly, every lot in the neighborhood got built up. I didn't really recognize it at the time, but it definitely was having a big impact on my life. And obviously in the region, the loss of the agriculture, the increase of flooding, the increases of other crime, pollution, severe effects on that area in North Carolina. I also have this memory as a kid of being able to go down to the river, the Tar River, and stick like a chicken bone in the water and pull out crabs, like one after the other. Little kid, you just go crabbing. You spend the whole day just waiting for one to come and grab it with the net. Over the 10 years I was doing that, from like age 5 to 15, there was no more crabs. Just none. Like you could spend the whole day out there with a freaking chicken bone. You're not getting crabs. It came down to the fact that there was a company called Texas Gulf that was down on the Tar River on the Permaculture Sound, and they were making fertilizers. And they were using the water as their place to put the stuff they didn't want to they didn't know what to do with it, right? So there was a lot of pollution, a lot of contamination happening. It's been documented since then. They were fined. The crabs are gone. You know, all the money in the world is not going to bring them back. So it's sort of that situation, you know, you're growing up with is profound effects on me. And I think it really does play into my life story. From North Carolina, I really got interested in this environmental conservation stuff. You know, I said, well, I got to go get an education and learn to save the world. So I got up and I moved to Colorado, University of Colorado, and went to get a degree in environmental conservation. So for 4 years, I paid money to listen to the problems of the world. 4 years of, you know, just like overpopulation, resource depletion. You guys know probably a couple more. Climate chaos. You know, there's a list, yeah. And so we just got hammered with all that stuff. It was very depressing 4 years. It was, in many ways, just did not. It didn't really feel like there was any answers, any solutions. You know, there's sort of mitigation efforts or ways we could restore that habitat, but it wasn't really focused on a systematic change or a systematic, you know, recognition, you know, what steps to take. And so it was very hollow, very sort of empty feeling, doing that educational paradigm, that academic experience. That's about the time I got introduced to this term permaculture. And I just, you know, permaculture is just a word, but it does signify a lot. For those of you who haven't really spent the time learning a lot about permaculture, it can mean quite a lot. But basically, to me, I'm for a couple different things about permaculture. It's a field of study that has ethics. So imagine if like architecture had ethics, or engineering had ethics, or like city planning had ethics. You know, so I think it's a very strong thing to include in any school of thought is ethics. But the earth care, the fair share, the people care are really laws or ethics that can guide the design process. And this is what we're getting at into permaculture. It's a holistic, ecologically based design system. And I really like the process as well of permaculture, because it really is, to me, it's very similar to a scientific process. There's observation, there's development of theories, there's testing theories. That sort of basis is a systematic approach to it as well. It's really, I think, well-founded in science, and gives a basis, logical, rational approach to solving problems. And so if you have an ethical basis for it, and you have also some principles that you can work with, you try to embody those ethics and those principles to meet your goals through design. Any questions or thoughts on that? Real quick. Permaculture, it's a giant nutshell. To me, it really resonates strongly with me, once again, to get away from this annual style of agriculture, this annual style of being. Like, we are really caught up into this fiscal cycle, or these, this sort of calendar year, or the 4-year electoral cycle, okay? But as a culture, I'm not sure we're thinking 25, 50 years ahead, 100 years ahead. And so we need to break that somehow. We need to tear down that paradigm that's really got us caught in thinking about 2016, the first quarter, the second quarter, the fiscal year, because it's pretty irrelevant, really, in terms of where we need to go. Because where I want to go is the perpetuation of our culture, the perpetuation of our civilization. One of the things that I did learn in college was within the overpopulation, there's also the one we missed was species extinction. I'm taking a step back here just to sort of try to hammer this in, but the species extinction component is really important. Obviously it's an indicator of how we're treating the environment to see species, diminution of the species number. But I think it's also a warning for us. And I think it's something that we're not really taking seriously at a cultural level, but we're on the list. Yeah? With the polar bears, with the whales, we are in danger as a race. The damage we're doing to the earth is limiting our capacity to perpetuate. We are at, when you look at those ecological terms like carrying capacity, and you're overburdening your ecosystem, and you get too many fish in the aquarium, and their shit starts to build up, and they can't survive. This is what we're doing, right? And so it is really important to sort of take that basis, that ecological basis of reality, and put ourselves in that picture instead of the separation. What Jackson was talking about earlier, the dominion component. This whole imagination that we had that we were going to control this situation, right? We need to figure out a way to be a part of this situation. I think, once again, that the basis of this is a lot of our philosophical approach, the Cartesian theory, the misrepresentation of Darwinist theory, the really focus on the individual and the strongest, fastest, the animal that's the most competitive will win, right? It's sort of the culture that we've been indoctrinated to. This culture has also led us to consumerism, sort of hyper-consumerism. Again, it's all about me. I'm trying to collect as many gadgets in my garage as I can, competing with the Joneses or whoever. We really try to, we're basing a lot of our self-esteem on our material possessions, on our vacations, on our bling, on our bucket lists. That's how people sort of value themselves. And so I think at some level that's a cultural, we need to recognize that as a cultural problem. One more thing before we go to DAcres. Because DAcres started in 1997. Up to that point, I'm still trying to wrap my head around what's going on in the world. As a college graduate with so much hope to make positive change, it was really hard to identify where the key leverage points were. And so for me, one of the leverage points that I really began to learn about in college and have studied quite a bit since is the soil loss. Just how to look at the history of civilization. And there's a really good book called Dirt. I think it's called The Erosion of Civilization. And if you look this up on the internet, Dirt, you might get steered to a history of the rock band Motley Crue. Don't go there. What you want is the erosion of civilization, not the metal era or whatever. But in the book that David Montgomery wrote about dirt and soil, he really outlines the history, say from the Romans to the Egyptians, to the slavery era in the United States, and really tries to correlate soil degradation, erosion, with the rise and fall of civilizations. And I think it really plays into what I experienced when I moved to New Hampshire.
Well, there was an earlier book, Soil and Civilization. That, I don't know if it came out around the Dust Bowl, but it was the same kind of rise and fall of civilization. Starts with rich soils and degradation, and then...
The book you're referring to is The Plowman's Folly by Edward Faulkner.
Yeah.
And that is right at that era, that post-World War II era. Yeah. Another great book to look at. So for my history, when I moved to New Hampshire, I had come from North Carolina, where they were just really beating up the place with the plow. I mean, really fence road, ditch line to ditch line agriculture. And you could watch it wash away. I mean, the ditches were literally filled with dirt all the time. You know, a lot of the work they had to do was actually trenching the ditches because so much of it was just washing away. And you could see it in the wind. You could see little twisters all the time. You know, it's just like a really a focus on erosion. And I remember being in grade school, and that's the kind of projects you would have. You would have like soil erosion projects because it was just such a huge issue. I moved to New Hampshire in 1997 and moved into a situation where there was quite a bit of old agricultural history. And this is what I mean. In the late 1700s, the King of England had granted some land to the Governor Wentworth, who then gave it to some friends of his so that they could move up to Dorchester. Yeah, that's how property was, just sort of given away. You're willing to settle it, you go up there. So in the 1700s, Dorchester was settled, colonial, mostly white people, mostly from the British Isles. They moved into Dorchester, and they moved into an area just really rich in old-growth forest. The northern forest is a beautiful thing. So what they do, they cut down all the trees. First things first, let's get rid of this really abundant, wonderful resource. Let's cut it all down and let's make charcoal out of it or something. Let's get it the heck out of here. And then, probably because this is all we know how to do, because we're from the British Isles, we're going to just raise sheep. Like all over the place. So they cut down all the trees and imported the sheep. Yeah? And around 1850, 1860, you had the Civil War coming. Civil War happens. Lots of the young people go fight. The town has to pay for the militia. The trees have all been cut down. Erosion is taking place at a dramatic rate. The Industrial Revolution is happening, and there's free land in Ohio. The town, population in 1850, 1,200. We're going from virtually zero in 75 years, 0 to 1,200 people. When my aunt and uncle moved up in the 1940s, after this, sort of shock, where the sheep farming wasn't working, the young people left, there's only 90 people in my town. So you go from 1,200 people to 90 people over less than 100 years. Well, wham! That's collapse. That's total annihilation. That's like disaster of biblical proportions. And I really think it's based on not only the circumstance of the time, but also their unwise use, systematic unwise use of the natural resources and their reliance on a monoculture. So I think those are really important lessons to learn. When we showed up at the property in Dorchester, it's all forest. You can see the stone walls through the forest. It had all grown right back. So the lessons that they learned is the forest is the natural ecology, and if you try to base your economy on just one good without being diverse, it's most likely going to fail. It's just a very weak economic system. So, when we get to Dorchester in 1997, my aunt is 89 years old. I have these sort of visions in my head of an alternative agriculture. It's not really so alternative. I think it was alternative ideas at the time for New Hampshire. Is more or less we're going to do lots of salad. Yeah, this was 20 years ago, and it's sort of Elliott Coleman era when he was doing a lot of four-season gardening. We'd come from the West Coast, where working in Washington State, where they have 11.5-month growing season, and they have a very affluent population that's willing to buy $20 a pound salad greens.
Also, they have 2 feet of black.
There's a soil advantage that they have. So you sort of come from the West Coast, transplant this monoculture type ideal to a climactic condition that we were not really familiar with. Does this sound sort of familiar to the same thing that the English had done, the people from the British Isles? So yeah, learned really quick. We really got our ass handed to us in a big way. We arrived in like September, and by October, half the crew had left. It was, it got cold, and we could tell we were going to have a hard time having a market for our produce, especially at the price we were considering it was worthwhile for us. It was really a big eye-opener. Being young, I was 25 at the time, and had really never engaged in doing these sort of stuff by myself. I'd always been sort of instructed or shown, and wow, it was it built my humility. It grew tremendously during that time, and I guess where I want to take it from there is we had to take a step back. I came over with my sister, my biologic sister, and 3 other friends. And their idea was to start something and then move on. And my idea was to start something in the short term and then sort of move on, have that freedom. And that first winter, I'm not sure when I figured it out that it wasn't going to be short term, and it was going to be hard to get help. The thing I think where we really started to recognize the problems were our basic needs. We really felt like didn't have control to meet those basic needs. And by the basic needs, I'll just go ahead and run a little list. And it's food is right up at the top. Yeah, food and water. And shelter. And clothing if you live up north. And community and medicine, education, sort of all lumped into one. Food and water, shelter, clothing if you like that, community, food, medicine, education. Is there anything else really that we need? Heat? Shelter? To me, at that stage where we moved to Dorchester, it was a moment to really reassess and figure out what our basic needs were. Because I was living in a barn, and we brought over like a half bushel of garlic from the West Coast, and we were trying to be self-sufficient. And so the learning curve just had to grow tremendously from that time. Really got more involved with recognizing the forest as our main resource, with our geography and our location. So the forest became our keeper. The forest is something that we're going to want to mimic. The forest is something that we're going to use for a resource throughout. So that means the forest has to supply our shelter, and the forest has to supply our food. How do we get there? Because the forest is that dominant ecology. You know, the northern forest stretches from Rhode Island or mid-Atlantic states up to the Boreal. It's the dominant ecology of this area. But you just can't eat much of it. Yeah? Acorns. You guys have tried acorn flour? It's difficult to make. If you don't do it right, it'll give you a terrible stomach ache. I know some people making it right now, and they're looking at charging like $18 a pound to make the stuff. I mean, it is hard to come by. Within the northern forest too, there's serviceberry. There's obviously mushrooms, and Russ knows a lot of edibles as well that are in season, but can be difficult to store and supply the caloric value that we really need to survive. So, recognizing this, what we came to the conclusion of is we needed to reconstitute, do a recomposition of that forest garden matrix. So we still want a forest. The forest is the dominant ecology. It's not like we're going to turn it into prairie and start growing grains. The land's not suited for it. It's upland, it's sloped, it's a forest. The forest is the natural ecology. So how are you going to use that natural ecology to feed yourself and to clothe yourself and supply all that you need? And so what we chose to do is use ecological disruption to create the opportunity to put in the food forest, the edible forest garden. And so ecological disruption could be a flood, could be a hurricane, could be a fire. What we use is pigs. So we'll go into areas of forest, mostly areas that are fairly flat, that we've identified. Oftentimes they're former fields, because you can see the old fence lines. So go in there and do clear cut, patch cut. You get out all the timber and you use it for the construction projects, the heating, and you use all the Tritus wood, the small diameter wood, for your mulch to build the soil. So we have a chipper and we chip, use all the parts. And then we let the pigs have at it, yeah? And it's sort of it varies. People always ask, well, how long with the pigs? Depends how big they are, depends what the soil type is, depends what kind of area you have, how much area, how much square footage you're trying to transition. But basically, you need to leave the pigs in there until the northern forest can no longer regenerate from this stump. Okay? So you got lots of species in the forest, the northern forest matrix that'll you cut them down and they'll grow right back with a stump with more bigger than they ever had, It's just like shoots. Red maple is a really good example of that. Beech is a really good example of that. Unless you have an animal or some mechanization to really keep those root systems suppressed, they'll come right back up. So the pigs get in there and really keep it suppressed, keep that disruption, pretty severe. And they're also adding fertility. We're bringing in tons of what we call food waste, literally tons from the municipality of Plymouth. We go to all the Main Street businesses, we go to the university, we go to the supermarket, and we get all the food they would normally throw in the dumpster. If there's ways that we can get it to people, we do get it to people, and there is a food bank aspect to this. But if it can't go to people, we put it to the pigs rather than going to the landfill or the incinerator. So by using the waste off our culture, we're building the soil up on the hill. So the pigs are in there, they're working hard. Basically they're working or they're sleeping. That's all I've ever seen them do. Sometimes they'll play with you and stuff if you want to run around, but they're really just, they're good at what they do. They like to work, they like to use their nose like a plow. You guys have seen the shape of their head, and you've seen pictures of pigs, they're always dirty in the nose. This is just what they love to do. So we're using the pig's natural tendencies. The next step, typically for us, is after we've got an area that's really cleaned out of northern forest, in other words, the northern forest isn't wanting to shoot right back up, we'll do potatoes. More or less just go right on the surface, maybe sometimes dig a trench along with the contours, and you plant your potatoes in rows. And then through the course of the year, we'll hill them up, we'll bring in some material, we'll bring in some compost, we'll bring in some straw, grass clippings, more or less the kitchen sink to hill up those potatoes through the course of the year. At the end of the season, we'll get in there, harvest the potatoes, and then what's left is raised beds. It's a transformation process that you're using the chainsaw, clearing the forest, using the pigs, and putting your annuals in place. So that first year, you can also get in there and start your forest garden. Now what's great about this situation is you have available sunlight and you have fertility now for your forest garden. When I first moved up to New Hampshire, I thought this forest garden idea was great. Got a bunch of walnut trees, walked into the woods, planted a bunch of walnut trees, they all died. Yeah, they didn't have sunlight, they had too much competition. So this phase allows you to clear land, fertilize it, get all the resources you can and utilize the resources you can off that cleared land, fertilize the land, and then plant your orchard. But during the time your orchard is developing, because you buy trees, they're like $30 a piece. They're like as big as your pinky. You're not getting a bushel of apples off a tree this size. It's going to take time. So that 5 to 7 to 15 to 20 years it takes you to start getting nuts or good harvest of apples, you can be growing annuals in the understory. You can also be starting to transition your understory into the herbaceous layer that you want to have, the bush layer that you want to have. So it's a transitional type process that we're still describing here. Because, like I said, those fruit trees, they take a long time to get to bearing size. You want to, during that time, give them attention. You also want to keep developing the fertility in the overall area. Like, say for an English walnut or something like that, you maybe 20, 25 feet between the trees. So one side of this room to the other. You're planting little trees like this big. What are you going to do with the space in between? So that sort of gives you an option to make this transition happen. Another way that we do this is sheet mulching. So just with that technique, you guys familiar with more or less lasagna gardening, using a whole lot of cardboard to, instead of using the pigs to create an ecological disturbance, you're using cardboard. Because it's just so readily available, it's so free. It's ridiculous. So that's sort of the ecological transition that we're going through to get from this very vibrant northern forest ecology that exists to the one that we're visioning, we're dreaming about. And once again, this is sort of really trying to anticipate and predict the future, so to speak. Because like these trees, you're planting walnuts, planting Japanese heartnut, planting obscure species that aren't necessarily grown. commercially or, just are being introduced, we just don't know how well they're going to do. And another factor of this is the climate chaos, where things seem to be getting somewhat warmer in New Hampshire. So, yeah, is it now the time to be planting the peaches? That sort of thinking. What I think is important to recognize with all this system is this is definitely not a profit-making machine. There's no short-term rewards on this. What this system is designed to do is to create a high level of abundance 15, 20, 50 years down the road. Like, that's the goal. So once again, how do we get there? I think we can transition from thinking about the stuff on the garden end to thinking about the organizational scheme now. So we're making a mental leap. You guys ready? So you're going from this work we're doing on the ground of creating an ecological disturbance and doing a new composition to thinking about this on your social scheme or your economic scheme, your localization scheme. And so a lot of that plays into, once again, trying to develop an economy and a state of being that's not extractive, but rather regenerative. Because, when we look at our historical patterns, when you look at the historical pattern of settlement, the people were really interested when they came from the British Isles in getting as much as they could out of the land, right? So they're trying to extract all the resources. They're trying to mine it for the wood. They're trying to just burn up the resource, so to speak. Whereas the new philosophy, what we're trying to instill right now, is to build up the ecology, build up the abundance, build up the diversity. So when we talk about the economics of it, what we did is come in and sort of start from scratch. So you have my great aunt, 89 years old, living alone in her house, sort of from another era.
When had she done that?
She's passed away now.
But what was she? Did she farm it?
Okay. Yeah. She had moved from England, as a child, and immigrated to New Bedford, Massachusetts. And then when she was like 19 or something, she ran away from home. 18, 19, she ran away from home with her father's permission because she had to get away from this man that was bugging her. So she moved to Connecticut, Hartford, Connecticut, and met my great uncle who was from the Northern Kingdom of Vermont. And he was in the accounting business and apparently had made more money than anyone she knew at that era. He was making about $200 a month. And he had a dream to go back to the land. They got together, and she sort of listened to him for a little bit, and finally she went along with his dream to go back to the country. So they moved to Dorchester. This is 1940-odd. And she says she cried for the first 2 years. Really lonely, really out of her element. She's used to living in the city where they had all kinds of conveniences, even in the 1940s. But my uncle was adamant. He wanted out of the city. He wanted back to the land. Wanted away from the crime, the pollution, and he also wanted independence, freedom. So they moved up in the 40s and lived throughout, their life. Well, more or less hobby farmers. My aunt was very crafty. She was in the League of New Hampshire Craftsmen and did a lot of decorative painting. And so when I moved up, that's more or less what she was doing. She was teaching occasional class, and she's getting pretty frail. She wasn't able to take care of her own chores, her own house cleaning, going to the grocery. She lost her license. Was one of the real reasons that I was requested by my family to move up. And so this really plays into that transition, this people transition that we're getting at. Because this natural succession is going on all over the place. You know, farmers are getting old. They get old to the point that they don't really farm. All the infrastructure goes to pot. You know, the buildings start to crumble. The machinery starts to wear. The fields start to grow in. You know, there's like this period of time till they sell out. That's when we moved in and created quite a disturbance. You know, we are essentially the ecological disturbance that happened in Dorchester. You're talking about an old-timey Appalachian town that just got invaded with a bunch of hippies from the West Coast. I mean, we caused a stir, a big stir. You know, there was occasionally people cited that didn't have their clothes on. There was somebody along the line probably smoked a little pot. It just, like, the whole town got in a hussy-fussy. Like, what the heck are these people doing? And really what they were worried about is us having a bunch of kids and, you know, them getting in the school district and everybody's taxes going up. It's just like, I'm not a population growth. That's not going to happen. Well, anyway, that was their concern. And what our concern, or what our goal was create a community. Right? So Dorchester had this sort of bedroom community model going, and then these hippies came in that wanted to sort of reshuffle the deck and revitalize agriculture and really build up, regenerate some community aspects to the place. And so we set to work doing that. And so DAcres, this entity that I work for, is a nonprofit that has a board of directors that owns the nonprofit. And we as DAcres, we are a community service, education, outreach entity. So what we're trying to do is be that catalyst for this paradigm shift. There's all the abundance up on the land in terms of area, you know, terrain, land. Dorchester is not a lot of people. There's tons of land. But we need to have a system to make a livelihood. And that system isn't currently in place. It's a bedroom community. People work elsewhere, or they work, you know, there's some techies and stuff in town, but there's no basis to community economic vitality. That's what we're trying to bring in this interim while the forest garden is growing into place. Like, we've just started to get yields of black walnuts and apples that are measurable and accountable. And that's taken 15 years. So during that time, we've had to be growing annuals. It's sort of my mimicry type mode of trying to, my metaphorical way of explaining that. And so during that time, you know, it's how do you make a livelihood as a farm? When we're clearing areas, you sell firewood. You try not to sell mulch, you try to use as much mulch as you can. But perhaps you glean a little bit off and sell some firewood. Maybe during that process too, you figure out different ways to make that livelihood, clawing inch by inch. What we do is a lot of events, food events. So whatever food we make on site, whatever food we grow, we really try to put it on people's plates instead of selling it wholesale. Like, I value tomatoes so much, like, I want to see the person eat it. I don't want to put it in a box and like ship it somewhere and get a wholesale price for it. What I want to do is bring people to the farm and try to get as much value as I can from that tomato that day. So during this interim period, it's really about trying to value add what we have there. So any resource, a great example is when we're doing the clearing, we look through and look for small diameter wood to have walking sticks. Walking sticks. Who needs a walking stick? You'd be surprised how many people that come visit us want a walking stick. They come from places where they don't have small diameter wood they could make a little cane with. So that's just like the simplest example. Another example would be value adding. You take like a piece of ash or walnut or rock maple, a piece of wood about this big, firewood normally, and we could slice and dice that in the wood shop and have wooden spoons or wooden utensils. So once again, it gives you this short-term economic product that you're gleaning off the land. And this is what is helping you make the transition to this robust economy of abundance. So it's more or less these different stages where you're trying to value add and bring in money to keep your perpetuation model going. Ideally, in the future, when the forest garden is totally is more fully developed, there'll be enough apples that we can value add the apples. Yeah, then you have your cider, then you have your vinegar, you have your baked goods. But we're not there yet, so it's a transitional process. It's a and really I term it in terms of evolution, because the type of farming that has been the convention, where it's an annual cycle, to me is very static. Like every year we're going to grow corn. Every year we're going to grow wheat. That field, yeah, maybe we'll switch the direction we run the rows, but nothing's going to change. We're going to keep growing the wheat, yeah? And it's a cycle. This evolutionary process really bears in mind the people, right? Because I'm also going to change as an individual, and the people working on the farm are going to change as individuals. This is where we get into one of these other really deeper thoughts on this, and it's the really, I think, what needs to be dealt with is that the capitalist system of using capitalism as a system of land management is not a good idea. It's a system of maybe functional in terms of settlement or colonialism, but family farming in the capitalist system is going to lead to exploitation of the land, and to me, it's really it's hard to see it succeeding over the long term. It's great when you hear about 10 generations of farmers on the land in Europe, even sometimes longer, but I think it can be somewhat rare, right? There's so many factors that inhibit that system from enduring. The divorce rate is like 50%. That's your first hurdle to get over, holding the marriage together. And then having children who are really interested in agriculture, that's a big maybe. So you really stack the cards against you to begin with the system. Particularly in these systems, these polyculture or perennial systems, where we're trying to plan 100 years ahead, and if you don't really know if the marriage is going to work, and you have such economic, the drive to exploit the land is so strong, how can we succeed? So I think at some level, I think we really need to recognize the danger of our current system. Where I've been fortunate is to have some resources made available to me in terms of trying to sort out, maybe options or other means of thinking about this. And this is sort of a story to this. When I first moved to the land, I was heavily influenced by the Nearings. You guys know Connor Scott Nearing? Back to the Landers who lived in Vermont for a little while, then moved to Maine, started the Good Life Center. They wrote a book called The Good Life. And it's a really popular book for this, for that era, getting back to the land. Where do I go with this story? I was a sort of a fanatic about the Nearings, and actually have run into Scott Nearing's great-granddaughter, and became friends with her. She's the founder of Bread and Puppet up in Vermont. I don't know if you guys are familiar. Elka Schumann.
What's the name?
Bread and Puppet. It's a theater group. It's a political theater group. And so Elka has been really generous in sharing some of the other books that Scott Nearing wrote. And there's a whole series called the Social Science Handbooks. And it's just so remarkable to me that this gentleman was working on this sort of stuff during World War II, during World War I. One of the books, this is Freedom, Promise, and Menace. And another book in the theory is The Tragedy of Empire. The Revolution of Our Time. Democracy is Not Enough. These are some of the titles that he was going through. And to me, it really plays into this concept of the commons and recognizing in our society the value of the commons. I think, Wes was getting into that a little bit when he was talking about how the commons are not really the commons if people can pollute or degrade them. So it's happening with our air, it's happening with our water, it's happening, when people can frack, they can stick something in the ground and pollute all the properties all the way around them and all the water all the way around them. It's just not reasonable and rational. So we really need to take a step back and question some of this, some of the current paradigms of our society and how we approach our needs. Within that, I think we just need to find other ways to manage the land in a non-extractive way that allows people whatever they derive from ownership. Is it security to live there for as long as they want? What does ownership grant you? Kristen, when you buy a car, what does ownership grant you? Freedom. So you have the car, you have the ability to go where you want or whatnot. But is it sort of the same if you can share the car? If you have times that you can use it, what's the difference? What I'm getting at is the title that goes with ownership. It's not something you can take with you. It's transferable. You could have equity off it. But what is it to ownership that people value so much? So if you're looking to own a piece of land, what is it that you need? Why is it that you need ownership? Is it control? Is it the security? Is it the ability to build equity and then trade it? I think we really need to assess and identify what it is about ownership that is driving our behavior. How do we break that cycle? Go ahead.
You said you're organized as a nonprofit. Does that mean you don't pay property taxes in town?
The property is not owned by the nonprofit. The property is still in my family's hands,
Okay.
so we're paying taxes.
Okay.
And I think that is something to consider within this. There is a danger, I think, to taking land out of the tax base.
And trying to make people happy that you're there.
Yeah. Yeah, you need to be cautious when you go down that road in terms of trying to put something in public ownership that then reduces the tax base.
Okay.
So that's not the goal. The goal, in my mind, is to figure out how people can share land. Because right now, our system is just subdividing land and exploiting land. It's the capitalist model that we have that's forcing us into this subdivision pattern. And so for me, I'm totally nervous about growing these wonderful trees, and I'm not even going to see them bear fruit, but who is? How do we create a model that will be enduring, that we can raise children that don't have to be afraid of losing the property, high taxes, the development pressures?
Mm-hmm.
How do we take all this land that's in preservation, being conserved all over the country, and get people onto that land? How do they form groups that can have a viable local economy and a livelihood? What we've tried to do is create this center that has infrastructure in place that people can endure on, and it's also going to invite people to view the model and to make, we want to make improvements on the model. We want people to come in and learn from it and keep going in this path. So what we did was we built a community center that has a commercial kitchen and a wood shop. And this is the basis of our economy. Commercial kitchen does this value adding for us. So, when we get some eggs, we can take them in to the root cellar, put them in the root cellar, and then first Sunday of the month we have a big breakfast. We put them on people's plates, and for 1-2 eggs, you can make $5, $10 putting it on somebody's plate, whereas a whole dozen you can barely get $5 for. So you really can value add, and also it's stacking functions, because the people come to the farm to do that. You don't even have to leave. It's a great advantage. I like going to farmers market and seeing people, but I hate driving there. I hate the time it takes packing up and unpack and bringing home wilty lettuce to feed to the pigs. I'd much rather go out to we have dinner tonight for 4, go out in the garden, pick what we need, put it on a plate, get paid.
So from the time period that you started your farm until now, how has the population been more receptive to what you're doing? How are you getting these people to come to your farm and do these deals?
Oh, the taste. The taste really makes all the difference. The exceptional quality of fresh food and the environment in which we serve. I think the way that we got people there is utter transparency.
Wow, that's great.
Just try to be open and receptive to whoever shows up. We try to channel them to a degree, but that was the strategy and the methodology, is just be completely transparent. This is what we're doing. Do you have any ideas on how to help? Inviting. Very open policy, open door policy. And we don't have any locks. 0. I don't have any keys. I don't know. We leave the keys in the car. Oh, that's where they are right now.
Do you harvest the pigs?
Yeah, we are on, right now, I came to DAcres as a vegetarian. I'd like to die a vegetarian. I'm not really into killing animals. I've done quite a bit of that. Moved into animals because we wanted to be more self-sufficient. And we wanted to make use of all the waste stream. And we felt like they were really good partners for this transitional element. Right? So the pigs, like, I love them. I love being around them. I do like eating them. I don't like killing them. I don't like that work anymore. And if you can't kill them, if you can't do that work, I don't know if you got any business eating them.
I just knew the Nearings were out of the
Veggies.
vegans.
Yeah, yeah,
So I just
absolutely.
wanted to kind of be clear on that with you.
Well, for me, well, there's one thing. Scott did love ice cream. Don't ever forget that. And yeah, that was the thing that I really learned about coming on was, I thought that being a vegetarian was sort of solving the problem. But yeah, you need to be practically vegan to get away from animal product. But when I was sort of started up at DAcres, I was so naive, I didn't really conceptualize that you had to keep breeding animals to keep getting milk. And every male you got was just veal, or just, you know what I mean? There's nothing to do with a rooster, but put him in a pot, he just...
When I was a kid, my father told me that they used to just cut a chunk of beef out of the cow. I didn't know you killed the whole thing until I was a teenager or something. So, just kind of
Everybody starts from
there. I didn't realize you kill the whole thing.
Yeah. No, but so right now the two things that I'll speak to in regards to animals is really trying to value the animals, the whole animal at this juncture. Like when we first started doing pigs, there was like pork chops and sausage. Like that's just such a waste. Like there's so much more to it. So you're really trying to get nose to tail, and really trying to refine your preservation techniques to try to get away from the freezer. So, salt cure, cold cure, just really trying to it's better for the flavor, it's better for the nutrition. The only thing that ever tastes good coming out of the freezer is the ice cream. There's just nothing else that really, you freeze beans, like, who must be some southern beans in there. But, there's so many better ways to do preservation than the freezer system. The conventional freezer system is just so bad in so many ways. The freezing food and septic systems and flush toilets, those are like my three, these are just all broke. None of those things work. Like, there's no excuse for us to continue to use those systems.
You said that you built a community kitchen and a wood shop. Is
Yeah.
the wood shop also a community wood shop?
We do, stacking functions. We'll do all our maintenance on a daily basis out of the wood shop. Like, if something just needs a screw or whatnot. So that is an immediate need all the time on a farm. We also do furniture. So, we do the value-adding things, spoons, fine furniture, beds, bureaus, that sort of thing. Also classes. And as well as include the community. If we know somebody, they sign a form or whatnot, they get to use the shop. But the real idea is to, once again, stack all those functions. We're in the northern forest, really trying to have that as a super focus. The third element of the community building that we built that's really helped tide us along on this journey towards being vegans again and having this food for us and just sort of sitting around picking fruit, which is never really going to happen, but that's sort of the image we're trying to dream of. But is the hospitality business. The upstairs of that has private rooms, and so we put people up. It's like a B&B, farm to table. And I probably don't want to do that necessarily the whole time. It's like sort of this interim phase where I don't necessarily mind the people, but I'm probably not the best. I'm just a little coarse to be the maitre d' or whatnot. You know what I mean? So, we're doing it. We're getting through, but that's like helps us with our cash income right now. Till we do have that that established, very robust, very viable orchard. Because you just need something in that evolutionary process to be looking to get you through to that end game vision. So it's sort of like, in terms of DAcres, we make between $100,000 and $150,000 a year. Somehow, every year. For the last 10 years, we made at least $100,000. It's crazy to me how we do this in the middle of boonies, New Hampshire, with 300 people, no stoplights, no nothing. I mean, we are the only enterprise in Dorchester. The only business that exists. Actually, there is one guy that does auto, he does a little bit of auto repair. So, but we, body work. But that's what I want to say, body work. Auto body work. Isn't that the funniest thing? Body work. Anyway, but it's just, there's very little economic activity there. And to make $100,000 in Dorchester, like, you're really finding all kinds of ways. And it's just a very diverse system. So you have classes, you have overnighters, you have produce, you have putting food on people's plates, any really way you can, that you're not extracting the resources, you're not denigrating the resources. That's sort of the ethics in mind. You don't want to degrade your resources or your base. You want to constantly be building this abundance. And the more abundance we have, the more practical it is to have more sophisticated classes or more sophisticated research or more sophisticated development. Like Russ will come up on occasion, Russ Cohen here, will come up on occasion just because we have so much diversity. So we can host like agricultural people just interested in plant ID now because we have so many species up there. 10 years ago, it would have been heading in the right direction with the natural systems that are in place. But now it's just, you can pick this apple. You can also learn what variety it is. You can also study everything growing on the understory. You can make herbal tea or culinary herbs with the stuff growing in the understory. And it's all contributing to the overall pollinator count, which is making more and more apples every year. So it's all stacking functions and integration.
Yeah, I had a question. Did you do any marketing, or was it all kind of word of mouth?
Good Lord. Yeah, I have gotten very good at all these things that I never wanted to. Social media, bookkeeping, ridiculous amounts of time spent. We have a YouTube channel with videos on it, 500,000 views. It's crazy. But it's just this push to try to build this entity and supply that information. You know, the YouTube channel gets people interested in what we're doing, also provides information. I mean, it's a bunch of how-to videos on there. We're getting close to time's up. One thing I want to get at is just this overall process. Like, we have some major problems in our society, right? So, and a lot of it, I think, is based on sort of this overconsumption, consumerist, hyper-consumerism mentality. So, the basis here is to take it back to meet our needs on a basic level. And I think if we as a society can accept that, that's the starting point, there's a long way we can go with that, is to really just recognize what the basic needs are and to try to move our society away from all these handheld gadgets and whatever, the distraction. I also think that overall, our relationship to land and this sort of, if we can renounce this private ownership scenario, that this process of community farming could really be the answer to our major problems of social justice inequities and our major problems with the prison system. And that might be sort of a leap, but really, in terms of social justice, people are being, there's disadvantages if you don't have access to land. If you don't, what my uncle was looking for in terms of his freedom and his independence in the 1940s, where he couldn't find that working a 9-to-5 job in the city, was granted to him by having access to land. So he had the skills, access to land, happiness, livelihood. And I see that being transferable to all these places in the urban sector where we have people packed in that, you know, are unhealthy because of their diet, because of the living situation. So we could figure out a way to empower these people to get back to the land, back to nutritious food, back to exercise, and back to meeting their real needs of their own accord, then that's really going to propel our society forward. I don't see us solving these problems any other way. This has been sort of the accumulation of my studies, has been sitting in that desk at the University of Colorado hearing about all the problems. Knock, knock, knock. These problems, these problems, these problems. And no one, the politicians, nobody is giving us the solutions, right? So in my mind, the solution is to take back the land, occupy the commons, and to develop an ethos that allows us to perpetuate without exploitation. And this is the same thing when I think about prison abolition, which is crucial for our society to get over the hump on this, is to figure out ways that we're not torturing people, putting them in cells, because we disagree with some sort of act they did. If there's violence involved, obviously we figure out a different way, but there's got to be a way where we can remove those structures from our society. And I think farming is a construct that we can use to get away from these systems that we've developed. It's like, I say, septic system, flush toilet, prison system. You know, these are broke systems. Everybody can look at these things and say, these don't work. These are not making progress for our society, for our civilization. So how do we find alternatives? And that's really what just drove me insane in college. It's just not even a direction. And whoa, let's just make it real clear, this is not the answer. DAcres is not the answer. Right? No. This is a step in a direction, which is, it might not even be the direction we need to go, but let's take some steps. Because you will not reach your goal unless you follow a design and figure out a way to get there. It's just not going to happen haphazardly for our civilization. I think that's really important to consider. And the practicalities, we just need to put it in process.
Well, I just wanted to say it would be environmentally disastrous if we had everyone moving out of urban areas into rural spaces. So and I think that's just another form of domination. If we're saying that we need to take back the commons. I hear what you're saying, but I think we need to be really careful about suggesting that people move out of cities and move into the country, because wildlife needs space too. And
no, I disagree. I think this style of farming, like the farming we're doing, we're 200 acres, we're basically on about 5 acres intensively. And the rest is still preserved in its natural state. And that buffer is necessary to preserve the water and to preserve the air.
But 50% of the world's population live in the city.
50% of the world's population. But if you think about all the land that is currently in monoculture, and the current land that's currently in grazing, if people were more situated, it's definitely going to take a population reduction. I think that's necessary. But by the same token, in the cities right now, there's not opportunity. There's no mechanism for improvement, as I see.
Well, there's a huge movement in urban agriculture right now, huge. And there's, a study just came out suggesting that if we converted 1/3 of urban spaces to agriculture, we could produce all of the vegetable needs of all city dwellers. That's huge.
Cuba, great example. Havana supplies most of their food in the inner city. Where they're lacking is their shelter, where they're lacking is their clothing, and where I believe there is community elements and so forth to a city. But those other gamuts, you could speak directly to food. I think that's important. But that does not answer the questions of shelter. That does not necessarily answer the questions of a community type arrangement where people are granted equal equities. There's still a system of dependence in the city, I'm afraid. And I think cities are a lot of fun, but the concentration is, I don't know if I would prefer that for the future of humanity.
I think we need both, I guess that's what I'm saying.
I know exactly what both are saying, like the influx, if everyone just decided to move out, well, there's people with a lack of knowledge, so therefore it's going to probably add to the degradation of soils and whatnot. And then having people growing in the city, like that's a great idea, but you're also relying on outside inputs like oil for heat. There's no trees growing. I mean, if you were to start burning firewood in the city, think of like Boston Common, done. Month, it'd be gone. So it can't support because it's covered in cement and there's.
Yeah, and this is an interesting or conversation that I've gotten into because I like to push. I'm trying to push you over the edge. You're trying to bring a little pushback. But like this at one of these, I was like, everybody needs to be involved with the food system, and this lady was like, well, I don't want to. I like chicken, but I'm not killing the chicken. It's like, really? Because it seems like, you just at least kill one. You should at least touch one. You're going to eat it your whole life. So, I'm pushing the envelope.
But just, for people to think about, because we live in a pretty rural state, there is a ton happening across the world with urban agriculture that is really fascinating, really cutting edge, and producing a lot of food and building community and producing renewable energy. So I just think we can't discredit that as a viable means of doing permaculture in the city. I think it is possible. It is possible. It's happening. So I think we should just, think of it.
That would be next year's lecture.
Yeah. There's going to be enough pressure with everybody at the
I'd be happy to talk about that more too, because I definitely like Toby Hemingway has this big thing where he was he more or less went to the country, lived in the country for a while, and then moved into the Portland, Oregon area because he couldn't handle the Hicks as neighbors, couldn't handle the inaccessibility of the things, the accoutrements of the city and so forth. And it always struck me as somehow kicking the can down the road, not really dealing with it. And I think it goes back to what you're saying in terms of all those systems of urban agriculture that I've been witnessing are not necessarily regenerative. They're still sucking resources.
Yeah, like you said, you have to start somewhere. You've got a lot of transitional stuff happening on your farm. I don't want to take over the conversation. It's somehow, I think it's a conversation.
Yeah, no, this is totally
It's kind of like well, you gotta
You have to work on both
slope
ends
it
of
if you
the
got
system.
them. You gotta work with what you got, and like a lot of people don't want to move out of the city. So, and a lot of people just aren't interested in agriculture. Like, so let's face it, like some people can care less, and like in the future.
So is it our burden as food producers and as producers to take? How are they going to derive those benefits unless they take that responsibility?
They might never get around to that.
Yeah.
Those people are probably the people dying from cardiovascular disease. They're not taking care of themselves because they don't really care where they don't care where their food comes from. Unfortunately, it's too bad.
There are people you can't make care, but there are people who wish for involvement and
Sure.
both urban agriculture and this kind of thing, just making principle.
Okay. So within this, there's what the Darwin quote. There's not the strongest or the fastest or the quickest. It's the most adaptable to change. So he's speaking of species. I think what we need to be speaking of is of culture. And so we're not only adaptable, we're not only capable of change, we need to change with a conscience. We need to change with a design and with definitive choices. And there will always be centers of population. We need those for trade, for commerce, for art, to create the leisure time to do art, to create the leisure time for higher thinking and academia. So there's not going to be any absolutes in this, but I do think we need to retransition towards an agricultural society instead of an industrial and an urban society.
And I think we need models. I mean, you're doing something that is how you participate in